If we stirred our walls to speak, what would they tell of our earliest homes? They would remember that throughout the Malay archipelago, the atap house was the architectural prototype of a home. Made of materials from the rainforest, atap houses were ideally suited to our climate. This landscape would see a great wave of change after our modern founding in 1819, when new European residents introduced brick houses to the island. The pragmatic settlers copied tropical features from local architecture, such as wide verandas and raised roofs for ventilation. With the subsequent influx of Asian immigrants came houses infused with their individual cultural styles. A handful of these houses had traditional typologies imported from the owner's ancestral lands in South China. Only two survive today: the River House at Clarke Quay and the house of Tan Yeok Nee at the corner of Penang Road and Clemenceau Avenue. This house was built in 1885 by the Chinese merchant Tan Yeok Nee, a wealthy Teochew businessman. Since then, it has assumed different roles as a residence, school, and the headquarters of the Salvation Army. During the Japanese occupation of Singapore, it was taken over by the Japanese Army.
It's only the rich, extremely rich Chinese and who were very much interested in the cultural background. They built that kind of houses. The street Chinese, they dominated the economy of Singapore at one time. This one is basically timber, because South Chinese architecture, or even in the dawn of civilization in China, it was all timber houses. When Raffles came in here, he planned Singapore, and he insisted in the plan, it should be all be done on bricks. No atap houses, no timber houses.
In 1974, one of the last standing courtyard houses, the old residence of Tan Yeok Nee, was gazetted as a national monument of Singapore. Restored in 2002, it currently serves as the Asian campus for the University of Chicago Booth School of Business.
Basically, Chinese houses from the south to the north are the same. You have a series of courtyards. They are created for lighting and ventilation, so that all these buildings, they are well lit, they are well ventilated. So it's a very scientific way of designing.
This is actually a replica of the original Chinese house, owned by the same owner in southern China.
This house restoration is based on this 3R principle: to retain, repair, and replace.
It's only the persons who have all this wealth. And then if you look at the door and the door knobs as well, or the rings there, will symbolize his own social status. And if you went in near the main hall, it's where the courtyard was where he met the public, and will represent his wealth, his status in society.
The different roof profiles, symbols of basic elements in Chinese belief: the metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. So if you look at this one, it is wood. That means if you have all these 5 elements, it's complete.
The unique thing about these Chinese, South Chinese residents, you find that throughout the dynasties, there's always the curved arch on the top. And you have the arches over the windows, over the windows as well, which protects them during the summertime.
We can take a look at all this glaze molding on the ridge. They were made from the broken bowls. Jianian means cut and glue. So we have to remake the bowls, broke them, and then bring them back to restore. Strictly speaking, the part that looks more lifelike are original. The part that looks a little bit stiff as the current one. There's a loss in the art of craftsmanship through modernity.
Horses will represent masculinity. Elephant means strength, you see. Then you get the fish, means fertility, prosperity, longevity. And if we say two ducks, mean there are people getting married, you see, love, affection.
These Gothic arches would not have been faithful to the original design, but we decided to keep them to show people today that this house had been used once by some Christian group.
Besides restoring the house to its original glory, contemporary elements and facilities were also incorporated for modern usage.
And there is a term in conservation called adaptive reuse. That means you adapt the users to the building, but don't change the building. It's not possible to insist on using this as a house, but the house itself must remain unchanged.
One thing can improve the public awareness is to open the place for public to come and visit. Of course, the owner must be agree.
This is the only one that has got a preservation and monuments board, and you can't enter beyond the glass wall and you face the security check. This is the only one. You know that? It's a shame. I would say so. Yeah. Such a precious thing, and Singaporeans can't see it.
Although little known to Singaporeans, the house of Tan Yeok Nee remains standing as a proud architectural icon. But many palatial houses from a bygone era of extravagance and splendor have disappeared. A house in 1915 costing a near mythical $1 million. Could such a thing have existed in Singapore? Currently an enclave of private residences and schools, Mount Sophia, named after Lady Sophia Raffles, once upon a time held some of the grandest houses on the island. None was more dazzling than the U Villa. The mansion of Yu Tong Sin, who made his fortune in tin mining, the U Villa was a palatial example of a Chinese-owned house that embraced the European style with gusto.
Well, here I am in Adis Road, and on my right there was the site of Adis Lodge, named after Mr. Adis. And that was torn down and replaced by U Villa. And sadly, U Villa was torn down and replaced by this condominium, which I believe is not going to be around for much longer. But that's very much the story of Singapore. But of all the structures that have stood on this site, I think U Villa, without doubt, was the most magnificent, with its marvelous silhouette against the sky, turrets and steeples and spires and God knows what. It really was a very impressive building.
Well, this is the highest point of Mount Emily, and from here you would have been able to see U Villa behind St. Margaret's School. Right now, of course, there's trees and the taller buildings, and you can't even see Cathay Building, but U Villa would have been sort of about 400 meters that way. Well, this wall would have been the retaining wall where the tennis courts were. Behind this wall was the tennis courts, and on the other end of it was the ballroom. The ballroom was converted into an indoor badminton court as well. So I think the house was there behind the swimming pool and where the pool is. The part here would have been the playground where all the kids from Cathay Apartments came to play.
Well, you find me in the former gardens of U Villa, and I'm sitting in a poolside structure, a sort of pavilion, and it looks like that these columns supporting the roof probably came out of U Villa itself. And I think I've seen photographs, and they supported the central dome of this tremendous building. In their day, there would have been a lot more luster to them. They've been shiny like marble, and unfortunately, the effect of sun and rain has rather diminished their shine, but it's good to see that they're still here. It was designed in 1913 and completed in 1914, and the architects were the most prestigious practice in town, which was Swan and McLaren. Now, U Villa is famous for having cost $1 million, which was an extraordinary sum of money in those days, but then Mr. Yu was a very wealthy man. And in terms of construction, I don't suppose so much of it went into the actual building of the house itself, but it was probably more the finishings.
The materials used, like marble floors, terrazzo columns, elaborate sculptural effects in the plasterwork, and all the furnishings imported from Europe made up the bulk of the $1 million spent in the making of U Villa. The sheer quality of the finishing created a house like a palace for Mr. Yu Tong-sen.
My grandfather lived here with his several wives. The house needed a staff of over 100 to support it. The gardeners, drivers, the kitchen serving staff. Well, this would have been the view of the house from Cathay Building, from where, more or less where Cathay Building is. And the driveway came up from Addis Road this way. So this is a roundabout here. And you can see there's a jaga standing there. The driveway was lined by marble statues all the way up. This road continued right through to the gate of Cathay Building.
I think the architect was probably this Scotsman, David MacLeod Craig, and he was a bit of a pioneer. He was one of the first people to really use reinforced concrete in a big way. And the sculptural possibilities of reinforced concrete were immense, and I think he really went to town in New Villa. So the main style of the building is Edwardian Baroque, and it's sort of neoclassical with rustication, lots of stonework and columns and pretty fussy sort of stuff. But then the really interesting thing is that the roof level, because at the four corners of U Villa there were turrets or circular towers, and some had an octagonal plan. And then they had these great spires rising up on top. So this gave this marvelous effect. It looked probably a bit like sort of Disneyland castles.
The centerpiece of U Villa was an octagonal drum with a fantastic dome on top. Visitors approached the building through a columned portico to enter a broad terrace, which was the actual center of the building where all the different rooms opened.
Some of the rooms were themed. The furniture would have been from different periods, mostly French influence. The house was very much in the French style. They had like furniture from Louis XIV and so on. On the main floor was mostly the drawing rooms and the dining room, the kitchens and so on. Billiard room. I spent a lot of time in the billiard room. The study. Adjoining the study was a bathroom, and next to it was the barber chair. So whenever he wanted a haircut, get the barber to come in and do it here. There was a spiral staircase that went into a small room just below the dome. That was like a hiding place for us, for the kids. My parents had these great parties. They were sort of like costume parties. You know, everyone would dress up in different kind of costumes, and so I would come out and hang out with the adults until I was told to go to bed.
1913, it was just before the First World War, and there'd been a tremendous building phase in the years around the turn of the century up until that time. Obviously, there was a lot of money washing around in Singapore. It was a boom time with the rubber and the tin, and a lot of very rich Tauke's were living in Singapore, even if their business interests were overseas, and they all wanted fabulous houses like this.
My father couldn't afford the upkeep anymore. It was extremely expensive to maintain the house. If it was converted into something else, like a museum or something like that, it would have been, you know, quite nice. I wish we kept it, yeah. Not that we have to own it, but at least it was kept as a memory of those days, you know.
This is an interesting point, is that one imagines in the colonial era that the British and the Europeans had all the money and they lived in the best houses. But it's really not the case, in fact. Rudyard Kipling came to Singapore on a brief visit, and he wrote something to the effect that everyone supposes that the British own the island, but in fact it really belongs to the Chinese. They have all the wealth. And it's certainly true. When you look at the houses of the rich Tauke's, they're far more extravagant than the British.
While the U Villa may already be history, it will be fondly remembered as a gem from a bygone era. The modern age of architecture ushered in houses of concrete, steel and glass. In this environment, some houses stand out, such as one that turns the concept of a treehouse inside out. Bold new generations of local architects have met the growing demand for sustainable and eco-friendly houses in Singapore's modern age. To accommodate changing social needs, family structures, and the perennial warm, wet climate, they adapted international trends in architecture to a local context. One example is this house, which was awarded the Singapore Institute of Architects Design Award 2008.
This house used to be a two-story intermediate terrace house like the neighbors on the left and the right. And the owner has requested to build it up to 3 stories, which maximize what URA has allowed in this area. Normally in the intermediate terrace house, it is rather cramped and stuffy. So to overcome that, I have detached the spaces away from the party walls, if you can see, on both sides. The facades are basically made up of sliding glass doors so as to provide maximum openings. But because there are plants almost at every corner of the house, you don't really feel so open in a sense. The plants actually help to serve as a screen.
We told him we wanted a lot of greenery, to cool the place down, and also said 5 bedrooms or en suites. That was the main criteria, and also to make use of the retaining wall. I think that was pretty much the brief. People try to maximize the floor area, the houses they build. Because we didn't do that, the architect, the freedom, do what he does best. And he's produced a house which has great feeling of space. It was actually through a magazine that I found Yongta first. So a house in a magazine that he's done, and we thought, wow, that looks pretty good. And it mentioned that he was, someone who is very focused on eco-design and who used the light a lot. So I Googled him and found that even as a student, he won award for eco-design. He was also mentioned by the URA as one of the upcoming young promising architects.
This is my working space. It's relatively small, but visually the space is great because you have great outdoors over here. And this is also where I draw my inspirations from. I myself would like to live in a house that is full of plants. So this came as a good opportunity. As an architect, you have to place yourself in the shoes of the client or the resident living in the house. How they feel like walking through a certain space and how they feel when they wake up in the morning. The house was designed with the plants as a priority. So it started off as a 3D landscape installation, and then spaces were then inserted within.
The trees that grow from the ground floor, they're actually coming through these apertures through the car porch. The whole top of the car porch has been converted into a whole water feature. And of course, rain collects in here and provides a very natural habitat for all the fish that actually live in the pond.
The kitchen used to be at the back of the house before reconstruction. In the new design, this was brought forward to the front because the back was rather gloomy and stuffy. And you could imagine if you do heavy cooking, the whole house was actually congested with fumes and smoke. So putting the kitchen up front is a natural response. It also provides a very cordial entrance as one comes to the house, especially when you smell home-cooked food. So you really feel at home as you enter the house.
People sometimes just wander in and they say, oh, what a nice house, can I have a look? And then neighbors would just drop by, because there are only like 30-odd families here. It's kind of gives you more of a neighborhood, community kind of spirit. So we're very happy about that.
I've detached the main house from the retaining wall so as to create light and ventilation into the interior. And it also allows rain to enter into the interior as well. But because the first story you have a pond around the living room, so you don't really get wet during a rainy day. As you sit in the living room, you actually feel more outdoor than it was.
This is probably one of our favorite places, the living room. And at different times of the day, not only do you feel the different effect of the green wall, you also feel the different effect of the light. Sometimes we see a bit of rainbow on the retaining wall, and it moves different times of the year because of different refraction.
The first thing that comes to people's mind is maintenance, how difficult it is. But I think on balance, it's actually not a big deal. And gardening can be a bit of a passion as well. It's therapeutic as well. We treat it that way. It's just like any other garden. We do get frogs quite frequently. We get squirrels running across the green wall. And we do have these, I think they're called sunbirds, that come in to pick up the nectar from the flowers.
The rooms are detached from one another, so each becomes a floating space by itself, allowing more flexible play of ventilation and light. The house reflects the aspirations of not only the architect, but also the progressive-minded residents.
I would hope, one day we'll change the way people think about building houses in Singapore. I think we all tend to build concrete facades and put lots and lots of glass. I would hope that we move towards more greenery. In fact, make walls out of greenery.
Sometimes it's a mindset change. I must admit, if we didn't have Yong Te, I would also think twice if somebody started describing a house like this to me and say, Claire, why don't you live in a house like that? I think I'll be also a bit worried, But as it turns out, it's actually so nice. And I guess we just hope that everybody will do it.
Oh yeah, my children's friends, they love it.
Yeah.
All the teenagers who come through, this is my dream house.
Teenagers love it, the adults love it, but think about the maintenance. The older generation goes, interesting.
The clients are very nice people. In fact, they are the nicest clients that I've ever met. They have a very open mind and they are ready to accept new ideas, which helps me to fulfill the design aspect of this house. They even invited me to stay in this house for 2 weeks because they were away for holidays and they wanted someone to look after the house. That also helps me to experience every single room, every single bathroom. You will never know how it feels when you wake up with a big screen of green plants growing behind you and with the sunlight coming in. That was an unusual experience which I didn't expect myself while designing the project.
The classic tale of the three little pigs mirrors the development of low-rise houses in Singapore, seeking shelter and protection from the big bad wolf. The littlest pig built a house of straw. The second built a house of wooden sticks. The third and wisest built a house of bricks. What would a fourth little pig have built? The architecture of Singapore's houses has seen numerous changes along with the ever-evolving needs of its people. With the predominance of nuclear families, smaller houses grew in popularity to accommodate shifting needs. The architectural language is often derived from the client's brief, the site context, the socio-cultural context and the availability of technology. But the aim of the architect should always be to build affordable, friendly houses to suit the residents' needs and ensure a happy environment within.